Hey guys, tonight we step softly into a warm, quiet room where the flicker of candlelight dances across the walls, painting gentle shadows that sway with the rhythm of the evening. You feel the calm hum of the world outside slowly fade, replaced by the faint crackle of the flame and the subtle scent of beeswax. Here, in this soft glow, your mind drifts comfortably to another time, another place, long before electric bulbs brightened every corner. In 1832, in the small town of Oswego, New York, a child named Mary Edwards Walker was born. Her father, a man with an inventive mind, often taught anatomy using wooden models he carved himself, a practice both curious and tender. Some historians still debate whether her early education shaped her defiance later. You might smile imagining a little girl tracing the smooth lines of polished wood, learning the secrets of the human body before most children even understood the concept of bones. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And perhaps leave a comment sharing your local time and where you are, letting the world know which quiet corner is sharing this candlelit journey with us tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you step further into this imagined past, the room seems to breathe alongside you. You notice the soft shadows that stretch and shrink with each flicker, and the gentle warmth that brushes your cheeks. The floorboards creak ever so slightly under your weight, a reminder of the lived-in comfort of old spaces. You hear the faint rustle of a curtain in the corner, stirred by the subtle evening breeze that carries whispers of history through the cracks of a window long left open. Outside, the Oswego River glistens quietly under the sinking sun, its waters reflecting streaks of gold that seem almost too gentle to touch. You might chuckle softly, thinking that Mary, as a newborn, probably had no idea that one day she would become a figure whose courage and unusual choices would ripple across decades. In your mind, the candlelight seems to gather around a small wooden table where sketches and models lie in delicate order. You notice a carved skeleton, its tiny parts articulated just enough to hint at the marvels within a human body. Perhaps her father demonstrated the movement of joints with patience, his hands steady and warm, explaining in a soft voice that carried curiosity rather than fear. You can almost hear the faint clink of his tools against the polished surface, a rhythm so steady it could lull someone into dreams as easily as the soft hum of the wind outside. Some historians still debate whether these moments of tactile, learning, and curiosity directly inspired her later independence, yet, as you watch the imagined scene unfold, you understand that seeds of confidence and exploration were certainly planted there in the glow of candlelight and the smell of carved wood. You wander your eyes across the room and see hints of Mary's future tucked in unexpected places. A bundle of fabric, neatly folded, perhaps a tiny garment awaiting alteration, whispers stories of movement and freedom that the young girl might one day cherish. The light flickers across a shelf lined with books, their spines worn and inviting, suggesting that the quiet rhythm of study was already a companion to her young mind. You sense a world that stretches beyond the small house, a world filled with questions and experiments, soft laughter, and gentle rebellion against the restrictive norms of the time. Even now, the candle seems to wink as if in quiet agreement, illuminating the corner where a carved wooden heart might rest beside anatomy models, a reminder that warmth and curiosity often travel hand in hand. The night outside deepens slowly, and with it, the room seems to contract around you, a cocoon of safety and quiet contemplation. You hear distant noises, the soft hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves brushing the side of the house, and perhaps the faint clatter of a horse-drawn cart passing by on the dirt road. These subtle sounds layer over the soft whisper of candlelight, creating a symphony of calm, the kind that makes it easy to sink into reflective thought. Mary's story begins in such quiet, almost invisible moments, and yet each small gesture, The turning of a page, the adjustment of a model, the careful attention of a father to his child. Fascination lays the foundation for the remarkable path she would tread. As your gaze lingers on the flickering candle, you can almost feel the past stretching toward you like a gentle hand, inviting you to walk softly alongside it. You notice the faint scent of parchment mingling with wax, the faint warmth of the flame brushing your fingertips, and the delicate play of shadow on walls lined with history and hope. You might smile again, remembering that history is not just a sequence of grand events, but also a tapestry woven from tiny, intimate threads. The quiet rustle of a page, the careful shaping of a wooden model, the soft chuckle of curiosity, these are the textures of Mary's early world. As you retreat in thought, the candlelight wraps around you completely, warm and gentle. The room exhales softly, a quiet sigh that mirrors your own. Shadows stretch and settle, and for a moment, time slows, the space breathing with you, calm and still, embracing the peaceful hush of evening's arrival. The warmth of Oswego in 1832, the soft crackle of wax, the carved wooden models, and gentle teachings, they all linger, inviting you to continue walking slowly through Mary Edwards Walker's life. A life that would one day ripple across time, leaving echoes of courage and quiet defiance. For now you remain in this gentle room, breathing in the calm, letting your thoughts drift like the flame's soft sway, ready to follow her into the pages of history, step by step, candle by candle, in slow, serene reverie. You step out of the warm, candlelit room of memory and into a pale morning where the first sun of the day filters softly across wide fields. The air is gentle and sweet, carrying the scent of newly cut wood from the farmhouse that Mary Edwards Walker calls home. You hear the distant crow of a rooster, mingling with the soft rustle of leaves in the orchard, a calm rhythm that feels like the world itself is breathing slowly. In 1830s Oswego, New York, Mary's family embraced progressive ideals, speaking quietly yet firmly of the abolition of slavery and the equal education of boys and girls. You notice the way her father moves among the fields, hands rough but careful, tending seedlings and teaching Mary small lessons in courage and curiosity with every gesture. You might smile, imagining Mary running barefoot across the dew-soaked grass, her laughter floating lightly over the hills, a sound as fleeting and soft as the morning mist. Her mother is nearby, tending a small vegetable plot, the sunlight catching the gentle curve of her hair as she bends to examine a plant. A story is whispered in the corners of family lore that she once burned her corset in defiance, turning a symbol of restriction into a shining reminder of freedom. You imagine the scent of smoke and old wood mingling in the kitchen, and perhaps even a faint sparkle of sunlight in her eyes, as she explains to Mary that comfort and self-expression are worth small acts of rebellion. The house itself exudes warmth. Its timber beams and polished floors hold countless footsteps of children and teachers, echoing softly into the quiet morning. You notice the soft patterns of light as they filter through windows, stretching across the rooms like long, gentle fingers of gold. You stroll along the path between the farmhouse and the fields, feeling time stretch gently with the rhythm of rural life. The air is rich with the sense of fresh earth and cut hay, grounding you in the calm. Nearby, chickens cluck in soft, steady chorus, and distant hooves echo along the road. Mary moves freely here, learning to observe quietly, pondering the world beyond the fences. Her father shows her simple machines and carves wooden models of skeletons, teaching anatomy and reasoning. You might smile, imagining young Mary balancing a carved skeleton in her palm, eyes bright with curiosity and playful mischief. Morning light slowly washes over the wooden fence, dividing cultivated plots from wild meadow. Dew clings to grass tips, hand-hewn beams show their rough texture, and smoke curls lazily from the chimney. Time feels suspended, each moment savored. Mary's mother, hands moving with practiced ease, teaches quietly about fairness, kindness, and the right of all children to learn and grow. These gentle lessons, woven into daily chores and soft conversation, leave a deeper imprint than any formal lecture, shaping Mary's understanding through patience, observation, and the rhythm of ordinary life. You imagine Mary running along the edge of the orchard, the sunlight bouncing off her hair, illuminating the wooden toys and carved figures her father crafted for her. Birds lift from the branches, scattering across the open sky, their wings catching the golden morning. The air smells faintly of wood shavings and warm earth, mingling with the aroma of freshly baked bread in the farmhouse kitchen. You feel the serene cadence of her early days, each step unhurried, each breath deep and measured. The family moves as one through the farm, tending animals, examining plants, and talking quietly about justice, education, and equality. It is a world where ideas can grow alongside crops, where freedom is taught as naturally as the turning of the seasons. You pause in a sunlit field, watching sunlight dance on tall grasses as the wind bends each stalk in gentle waves. Mary lifts her hand to feel the movement, sensing the soft earth beneath her feet. Her mother's discarded corset, a memory of defiance, whispers lessons of courage and self-expression. Sparrows chirp from nearby hedges, punctuating the farm's quiet murmur. Even as a young girl, Mary senses the vastness of the world, learning that small, independent acts can ripple outward, quietly shaping life in meaningful ways. The light grows warmer, spilling across the farmhouse walls, illuminating the hand-carved frames of windows and doors. Wooden beams, freshly oiled, give off a subtle, comforting scent. You feel the heartbeat of the farm, slow and steady, as if each plant and tree, each brick and plank, participates in a silent dialogue of resilience and care. In these hours, Mary absorbs lessons of patience and observation, of freedom and moral courage, all nestled within the calm, repeating rhythm of farm life. A faint breeze rustles the leaves, carrying the scent of new grass and warm soil, mingling with distant laughter and soft footsteps. You notice how the morning light stretches slowly across the fields, lingering over the crops, highlighting every gentle motion and whisper of life. As you move through the orchard and across sunlit meadows, you see Mary's small hand tracing the grooves of carved wood, her eyes bright with wonder. Birds flit overhead, sunlight catches dew on their feathers, and a faint smile crosses your mind at the thought of her curiosity, untamed and full of possibility. The farm, quiet yet alive, feels like a cradle of ideas, a sanctuary where principles of equality and kindness are nurtured alongside vegetables and flowers. Even the sound of distant water moving in the brook seems to harmonize with the slow, deliberate pace of her family's values. The morning wanes gently, sunlight softening across the field edges, bathing everything in a warm, honeyed glow. You notice the delicate textures of the farm, the grain in the wood, the rough stone of the path, the softness of fur on animals. Every detail carries a sense of calm, as if time itself has slowed to accommodate the serenity of Mary's childhood. You inhale the quiet harmony of the day, carrying the scents, the soft sounds, and the vision of sunlight moving across wide, open fields. Here, in this farm bathed in soft morning light, Mary's early life unfolds with patience, curiosity, and gentle defiance. You step from the warmth of morning fields into the softer glow of an afternoon breeze, the kind that brushes lightly across your shoulders and carries with it a promise of change. The farm is quieter now, its sounds stretched thin under the gentle sun, and you find Mary no longer a small child, but not quite grown, standing at the edge of the orchard. Her skirt shifts in the wind, lifting just enough to show the sturdy boots beneath, and there's a calm confidence in her posture, as if the landscape itself is teaching her how to breathe more freely. At 15, Mary makes a choice that ripples through her life. She stops wearing the restrictive corset expected of young women. You might smile softly at the thought, imagining her drawing a long, slow breath, and feeling her ribs expand without resistance for the first time. The wind, almost conspiratorial, seems to swirl around her in gentle approval. You walk beside her through the orchard, where shadows stretch long and dappled, filtering through leaves that sway like tiny green curtains. Each step she takes feels a little lighter, a little more her own. She listens to the slow hum of the farm. The sounds familiar, but somehow sharper now that nothing constricts her breath. The fabric of her clothes moves naturally, following the rhythm of her stride, and you can almost hear the subtle flutter of her loosened blouse in the breeze. Letters from the era mention something unusual for a girl her age. Mary sewing late into the evening to redesign her own trousers cut shorter, shaped differently, stitched by hand to allow easier movement. You imagine her bent over a candlelit table, needles and thread scattered like slender silver instruments, her fingers working quickly, but with softness, determined yet careful. Perhaps she chuckles to herself when a stitch runs crooked. After all, it's hard to be a revolutionary and a tailor at the same time. You follow her out into the open field, where the afternoon sun hovers low, bathing everything in a mellow gold. The wind picks up again, tugging gently at her hair, and she lifts her face toward it, as if checking whether the world approves of her freedom. Her newly altered trousers peek out from beneath her skirt when she walks, the fabric dark and sturdy, each seam sewn with intention. You notice the delicate sound of grasses brushing against her boots, moving in rhythm with her steps. The world feels slow and forgiving, offering her space to explore who she might become. Even the shadows cast by the hedgerows seem to part softly as she passes, giving her room to claim her independence. You wander with her toward a wooden fence warmed by hours of sunshine. She rests a hand on the rail, the wood smooth beneath her fingers, and she inhales deeply. No fabric biting into her ribs, no stiff whalebone stays forcing her posture. There's relief in that breath, a lightness that seems to rise from her core and drift into the late afternoon air. Around her, the wind continues its gentle chorus, lifting the edges of her clothing like tiny flags of personal triumph. You feel a quiet pride radiating from her, subtle but unmistakable. She is a girl who understands comfort, not as luxury, but as necessity, and freedom, not as rebellion, but as truth. Walking along the orchard path, the scent of ripe fruit blends with the earthy warmth of sun-soaked soil. The sky tints with evening lavender, spreading slowly like watercolor on paper. Mary strides with newfound confidence, boots landing softly, steady yet unhurried. She tests her modified trousers with longer and quicker steps, and a faint, almost secret laugh escapes her as she realizes she can run freely, unimpeded by stiff seams. This small personal victory feels monumental, a quiet triumph in learning to move gracefully in her own rhythm. You imagine the breeze sweeping across her as she starts to jog, then run, the wind lifting her changed garments in rippling waves. Her hair brushes back, her breath draws deep and open, and her steps land with lively grace. It's easy to picture her mother watching from the house, a knowing smile touching her lips before she returns to her chores. Perhaps Mary laughs fully now, the sound carried lightly across the field, fading into the rustle of leaves overhead. You sense how the moment anchors itself in her memory, shaping a philosophy of movement, freedom in body, freedom in thought. You might even joke to yourself that she has just invented the 19th century version of athleisure. The light softens, turning golden edges into warm shadows. Mary slows toward the farmhouse, her clothes now practical and true to her needs. She lifts her skirts slightly to avoid a branch, revealing carefully stitched hems. You almost hear her muttering over adjustments, small details crucial for running freely through fields. The evening air brushes cool and refreshing against her as she pauses on the porch steps, letting the last touch of sunlight linger on her skin before it fades into the softening evening. You take a moment with her there, listening to the quiet hush of farm sounds settling into dusk. The sky deepens into gentle blues, and crickets begin their twilight song, a soothing rhythm that seems to mark time in slow, patient intervals. Mary leans on the porch railing, letting her shoulders relax, her breaths even and unbound. Her choice to set aside the corset is not dramatic here, just a girl freeing herself from discomfort, but you can feel how deeply it shapes her sense of self. It is a choice rooted in calm clarity, shaped by the values of her family and strengthened by her own quiet resolve. As the first stars emerge, a cool wind sweeps across the fields, lifting her skirt in a playful, encouraging gesture. The moment glows softly freedom, dusk's calm, and the steady rhythm of independence taking hold. In this twilight, Mary stands simply as herself, moving through the world with comfort, confidence, and quiet grace, fully attuned to the gentle unfolding of her own presence. You step with her into a new kind of stillness, not the hush of open fields or the breeze-lit farm at dawn, but the solemn quiet of old academic halls where the air carries faint traces of ink dust and long-forgotten footsteps. The corridors of Syracuse Medical College stretch before you, narrow and dignified, lit by tall windows misted with morning condensation. The year is 1855, and Mary Edwards Walker walks these halls not as a visitor, not as someone passing through, but as a student, a rarity, a quiet defiance wrapped in steady footsteps. You hear the soft echo of her boots tapping on polished wooden floors, each step gentle but sure, as if she knows the building is listening. The faint scent of old paper mixes with cold stone, stirring a sense of entering a sanctuary of minds. You follow her down a long, quiet hallway where winter sunlight struggles through frosted glass, casting pale, rectangular patterns across the worn floor. The muted light slows your breathing, making each inhale deliberate. Wooden doors with brass plaques dulled by years of touch line the corridor behind one. Cadaver studies. Another, lectures on anatomy, physiology, and the hidden intricacies of the human body. Mary pauses occasionally to read the small labels, her breath forming soft clouds in the chilly morning air. Calm and attentive, she absorbs every detail, gathering threads for a tapestry she intends to weave into her future. You might smile at her muttered medical terms, as if practicing spells from a dusty secret book. You walk with her into the lecture hall, where rows of wooden benches rise in semicircles, steeply stacked so that every student can peer down at the central demonstration table. The wood creaks softly when she sits, the sound blending with murmurs of classmates shuffling notes and clearing throats. There is a gravity here, a hushed, anticipatory weight in the air, as a professor enters with chalk dust clinging to his sleeves. You hear the scrape of chalk across the board, brittle and steady, drawing lines and arteries and unfamiliar Latin terms. Mary leans forward, elbows on the desk, pencil poised. Her attention floods the room quietly, not with bravado, but with deep, deliberate focus. She writes quickly, her notes neat and compact, the rhythm of her pencil strokes blending with the faint tapping of rain outside. She studies harder than most, not out of insecurity or competition, but out of sheer hunger for understanding. Records hint that on some nights she slips away into an old, nearly forgotten library room, one rarely used, with shelves leaning slightly under the weight of untouched books. Dust lingers in the corners like fine gray lace, and only one small table sits beneath a curtained window. You imagine her lighting a single candle, its flame trembling slightly as if uncertain it can fill the room. But it does barely, casting warm amber light over anatomy charts and thick medical texts. She reads deep into the night, the candles shortening with each hour, the silence broken only by the soft turn of pages and the occasional sigh of the old building settling. You stand beside her in the library, watching warm candlelight reflect in her eyes as she traces diagrams with her finger. Determined and patient, she moves steadily, pages turning, pencil marking notes. Shadows flicker across walls, like approving ghosts of old scholars. The room smells of mold, parchment, and cooled wax. Cold fog creeps along the window, and your breath forms soft clouds. Night wraps the building in stillness, and Mary's slow, controlled rhythm is the only motion of quiet training for sleepless nights long before any battlefield awaits. You trail behind her the next morning as she walks the corridors again, a little tired but carrying that fatigue like a quiet badge of honor. Sunlight seeps through the misted windows, glistening on the floorboards, and you can hear faint whispers of early arriving students drifting from nearby rooms. The long hallway is colder now, the winter air creeping through imperfectly sealed frames. You run a hand along the banister of the staircase and feel the smoothness worn in by decades. Mary descends the stairs with a slow, thoughtful rhythm, the scent of wet wool and old books following her like a gentle shadow. In dissection rooms, she stands with determination, handling instruments with surprising steadiness for someone so young. The metallic scent in the air mingles with the crispness of winter drifting through cracked windows. Paper rustles softly as professors hand out notes. Chalk dust swirls faintly when diagrams are drawn. Every sound feels amplified in the stillness, the scratch of pencils, the shuffle of boots across wooden floors, the distant hum of wind outside. Through it all, Mary's focus never wavers. She observes, absorbs, and commits to memory with the same patience she learned from life on the farm. You walk with her across the college yard, the cold air brushing against her cheeks. The trees stand bare, branches etched against a pale sky. She clutches her books to her chest, exhaling a soft mist that lingers momentarily before dissolving into the morning. The crunch of frost beneath her boots echoes faintly between the tall buildings. She pauses at the steps of the main entrance to look back across the grounds, her breath steady, her gaze determined. The wind nudges her coat lightly, as if encouraging her onward. In 1855, she graduates an accomplishment that feels less like a ceremony and more like a quiet victory whispered in the corridors she filled with her presence. You imagine her holding her diploma, the paper thick and slightly textured, her fingers brushing over the raised lettering. Perhaps she allows herself a tiny smile, the kind you'd miss if you blinked. She walks out into the cool air with the confidence of someone who has earned her place through patience, resilience, and countless nights lit by a single candle in an abandoned library room. Walking beside her, you feel the gentle weight of her journey the long hallways, misted windows, turning pages, and candlelit shadows, and sense something vast and quiet beginning, unfolding slowly, deliberately, with each measured, thoughtful breath. You step into a gentler chapter of her life, one that feels like soft dust on wooden floors and late afternoon light drifting through curtains. The clinic she opens with Albert Miller stands at the edge of a quiet road, its windows warm with a glow that feels almost like candlelight even in daytime. You hear her footsteps as she moves through the small waiting room, her pace steady, neither rushed nor burdened. The year is still young in its century, life still unhurried, and Mary lets you feel each moment settle like fresh grains of pollen in a sunbeam. The clinic is modest, its walls lined with shelves that hold jars of dried herbs, glass vials, stacks of folded cloth, and a few books whose leather bindings are softened by repeated handling. Mary arranges everything with the same care she once used when tending the fields of her childhood. The floorboards creak softly under your weight as you step further in, the sound blending with the distant murmur of wind rushing against the eaves. It is a place built not for grandeur, but for usefulness, for quiet service, for the kind of calm labor that feels almost like meditation. You might smile imagining her debating with Albert over which jar should go on which shelf, only to win by simply reorganizing them when he steps out for lunch. She tends to the back of the property, where her small herb garden grows in neat rows. Lavender, chamomile, mint, and feverfew lean gently toward the sunlight like old friends greeting her. Many people never learned that she planted and maintained this garden herself. A dry rustle of leaves fills the air as she runs her fingers along the stems, checking the soil with practiced ease. The smell is warm and earthy mint cool against the nose, chamomile sweet as warm hay. Each plant thrives under her careful attention, as though they recognize her steady presence. She breathes deeply, inhaling the fragrance of growing things, the scent grounding her before she returns inside. You feel the same calming pull, almost like someone pressing a warm hand on your shoulder. Inside, the clinic hums with the smallest sounds of daily work. Nothing hurried, nothing sharp. Teacups clink softly when Mary and Albert take short breaks between patients. You hear the faint hiss of a kettle heating over a small iron stove, its whistle low and lazy. The steam curls upward, carrying the scent of dried herbs she uses to make simple remedies. When she pours tea into cups, the gentle splash is almost musical in the room's quietness. The aroma of steeping leaves mixes with the faint woody smell of the building, creating a scent that feels like an invitation to sit, breathe, and let time slow to its natural rhythm. You might chuckle at the thought of Mary claiming tea as her secret medical tool, only half joking. The waiting room stays hushed through most days. Occasionally, a visitor arrives with a gentle knock, announcing themselves with soft footsteps on the porch. Mary greets them with a calm voice and leads them through the door to the examination space, where sunlight filters through lace curtains and lands in soft patterns across the wooden table. She listens with the patience of someone who has spent a lifetime observing small details, tones of breath, shifts in expression, subtle tensions across the shoulders. It is quieter work than the years ahead will bring, yet it shapes her steady way of tending to others. You can feel it in each measured movement, as though she folds the silence around her like a protective cloak. Albert moves with a softer rhythm as well, though he sometimes glances at Mary with a bewildered kind of admiration when she rearranges the clinic for the 4th time in a week. His steps echo lightly as he crosses from shelf to shelf, handing her tools or notes with an ease that speaks to their early partnership. Often, when Mary works late, he brews tea with extra mint from her garden, the fragrance filling the room like a slow exhale. You hear the faint clatter of spoons, the gentle sip, the shared quiet between them. No rush, no argument, just the soft cadence of two people tending a community. If you listen carefully, even the stove seems to sigh in contentment. The days drift by in warm tones. Afternoon light lingers across the floor in long gold stripes, dust motes drifting lazily through it like tiny planets in a sunlit universe. Mary wipes her hands on a cloth apron and steps to the window now and then, watching horses pass on the street, their hooves making a distant, rhythmic thud. The breeze slips through the cracked window, carrying the scent of drying herbs from the garden. You breathe it in with her, a mix of earth and late summer warmth. Time feels slower here, stretched gently like a warm blanket being pulled across a bed. You might even laugh quietly at how the chair in the corner seems determined to squeak only when someone tries to sit down stealthily. Evenings settle into a deeper stillness. Mary lights a small oil lamp, its flame steady, illuminating shelves with a soft amber glow. The shadows shift slowly along the walls as she reviews her notes, flipping pages with deliberate care. The room smells faintly of lamp oil, mint, and old wood. Outside, the crickets begin their nightly chorus, a gentle hum that presses against the windows like a natural lullaby. She closes the ledger, takes one last sip of tea, and steps outside to check her herb garden under the moonlight. The cool air carries the scent of damp soil. Leaves rustle softly, whispering in the quiet. You stand with her, feeling the night settle around you like a warm shawl. In this chapter, silence is not emptiness, but fulfillment, the stillness of purpose and craft. The clinic breathes with her, the herb garden flourishes under her care, and each cup of tea joins the steady rhythm guiding her forward. This quiet shapes her resilience, leaving an unhurried, warm, earthy peace that lingers gently. You step with her into a season where the air feels heavier, where the light seems to hesitate before touching the earth. The year edges slowly toward 1861, and the United States drifts into a strange quiet, the sort that feels stretched too thin like a canvas pulled tight before someone dares to paint the first dark stroke. The sky hangs low on some mornings, its colors muted as though someone has sifted a veil of ash-blue mist across it. Mary moves through these days with the same steady rhythm that carried her through the clinic. Yet even she senses something shifting deep beneath the surface of ordinary life. Her footsteps echo a little differently on the wooden porch. Her breath stays longer in the cold air, and the silence feels less restful now, more watchful. You walk with her along the narrow road leaving the clinic, mist curling around the trees like soft smoke. Branches blur at the edges, as if the world cannot choose between clarity and haze. A subtle tension threads through the landscape, like a taut cord ready to snap. Mary pauses frequently, staring at the horizon where the sky dims into pale steel. Some mornings, the light feels wrong to her, though she cannot explain why. In private notes, she writes of a feeling that the sky has shifted, a phrase later debated by historians. Whether it marks weather or the nation's uneasy future. The ambiguity hangs quietly in the air, folded between her words. You stand with her in the herb garden, where the plants lean differently, now under the late winter chill. The lavender looks duller, the mint fragile, their scents weaker in the fading cold. She kneels to check the soil, her breath drifting upward in a pale cloud. Even here, in this small sanctuary of calm, the world feels poised on an edge. Mary's hands move with practiced gentleness, yet there's a pause in her touch, a stillness that wasn't there before. Perhaps she feels the subtle tremor spreading across the nation, the uneasy conversations drifting through taverns, the sudden bursts of newspapers filled with arguments and accusations, the distant hum of unrest traveling through letters and town meetings. She listens to it all the way one might listen to a distant storm rumbling beyond sight. Inside the clinic, the stillness deepens. Patients sit a little more quietly in the waiting room. The faint clink of her teacups seems sharper against the hush. When Mary and Albert share their late afternoon tea, the steam rising from the cups twists and curls as if hesitant to settle in the air. The scent of chamomile and dried mint, usually warm and grounding, feels slightly thinner, like a familiar melody played half a note off. She glances toward the window often, studying the sky as though it might explain itself. On some days, clouds bloom in muted grays and yellows, almost bruised in tone. In her journals, she notes these strange hues and the world holding its breath. Historians debate whether she observed real atmospheric shifts or symbolized creeping dread. Both interpretations linger, unresolved, in the quiet tension of her words. You walk with her to the town center, where the streets are quieter than usual. Shopkeepers stand in their doorways, speaking in hushed tones. A sense of waiting permeates everything, the air, the buildings, the people moving with overly careful steps. Newspapers rustle sharply when men unfold them on the corner, their brows furrowed, their voices low. Mary lingers near these gatherings, not to join the arguments but to observe, her expression thoughtful and unreadable. The fog hangs low along the street, softening outlines of horses and wagons until they look like faint charcoal sketches. Even their hoofbeats sound muffled, swallowed by the heavy air. At home, evenings stretch longer. She lights an oil lamp, the flame flickering like a thin tongue of gold against the deepening gloom. Shadows lengthen across the floorboards, quiet but restless. She reads medical texts, though her eyes drift from the page toward the window more often now. Outside, the sky shifts through slow washes of gray and lavender, the colors flattening as night approaches. There's something unsettling in the stillness, as if each night folds in the same muted palette. You can almost sense her trying to interpret it, wondering whether the world is dimming because of winter, slow retreat, or because the country is bracing for fracture. Some nights she writes again in her journal. Her handwriting is steady, but the entries carry a faint tremor of unease. She describes the atmosphere as thick, the mornings as prematurely dim, the sunsets as tired. These descriptions later ignite scholarly debate. Were they literal impressions or metaphors for the nation's unraveling unity? You might smile softly at the thought of historians combing through her poetic phrases, arguing over whether the sky truly darkened or whether Mary simply felt it doing so in her bones. Either way, the effect lingers in the room with her, adding a subtle weight to the lamplight glow. You follow her outside on an early spring morning when the fog is dense enough to swallow sound. The world feels wrapped in wool. Bare branches reach out of the mist like pale fingers, and the road dissolves into a white blur a few feet ahead. Mary stands still for a long time, listening. No birdsong, no distant chatter, only the damp quiet pressing around her. She shivers slightly, not from cold, but from that same sense of imminent change. In the silence, you can almost hear the country holding its breath. Then, in April 1861, war arrives not with thunder, but as a subtle shift in the air, a long-held tension finally exhaling. Mary stands on the porch, reading the news with steady eyes. The pale, unremarkable sky belies the sharp clarity she feels inside. Beneath her feet lies a threshold, the end of one quiet chapter and the start of another. Mists, muted skies, and symbolic tremors fall behind her as she steps forward, poised for a world about to change her profoundly, and one she in turn will shape. The moment is quiet, heavy, and resolute. You follow her into a morning that feels suspended between breaths, the pale light spreading gently across a landscape softened by drifting fog. The war has officially begun, yet everything around her moves with a muted calm, as though the world itself is trying to cushion each step she takes. The roads glisten faintly with dew, and the modest houses along the way appear wrapped in thin veils of mist, their outlines blurred like old charcoal sketches. Mary adjusts the strap of her bag over her shoulder, the leather creaking softly, and you step beside her as she begins her journey toward Washington, D.C., a journey that feels less like marching toward conflict and more like drifting into a new chapter she has long sensed approaching. You follow her down the winding path away from home, each footstep sinking gently into the damp earth, softening the sound. Her stride carries quiet purpose, unhurried and free of hesitation. Fog curls around her boots like gentle waves, thinning into ribbons along the fence posts. Birds call intermittently, their voices stretched in the misty air, as if unsure how loudly the day should begin. Mary listens with a faint smile, already envisioning her role in the months ahead. She has decided to volunteer as a surgeon despite rules, barriers, and skeptical eyes. Her choice is as soft as morning light, yet as firm as the ground beneath her feet. You follow her along the village roads, where residents drift like soft silhouettes between houses. The fog simplifies everything. Trees become pale brushstrokes. Rooftops dissolve into the low sky. A distant dog sits motionless, as if painted in. A few neighbors wave slowly. Rumors of her plans travel gently here, like leaves of a calm current. Mary lifts her hand in return, fingers tracing a faint line through the mist. No words are spoken. The moment is too delicate. A quiet nod to courage rather than a dramatic farewell. At the carriage stop, the fog thickens, settling over her shoulders like a shawl. The waiting carriage appears ghostly in the pale light, wheels damp with dew. Mary steps inside, settling by the window to watch the landscape slide past. Horses move with slow, steady hooves, their breath rising in soft clouds. Fields stretch in muted sage, ash blue, and pale brown, like an unfinished watercolor. Her fingertips trace the blur of passing fences, thoughts drifting to the Capitol, the patients she hopes to help, and the shifting sky whose strange colors have followed her for months. The journey to Washington lasts for hours, yet it unfolds with the same unhurried pace. She watches farmhouses emerge from the fog, only to sink back into it moments later. Some appear so gently faded that they could be memories rather than real structures. You imagine her seeing echoes of her childhood farm between the drifting veils of mist, the sunlight over fields, the smell of fresh wood, the sound of her father's steady voice. It brings a kind of calm into the carriage, even as the world beyond prepares for conflict. Her posture stays relaxed, her breathing slow. Every so often she chuckles quietly to herself, perhaps amused by the way the fog makes distant cows look like wandering ghosts. When the carriage stops near a small post station, she steps down, stretching her legs in the cool air. The ground here is firmer, and the fog thins enough to reveal a group of travelers gathered beneath a modest shelter. You hear fragments of conversation, updates about troop movements, news from cities farther south, speculations spoken with gentle worry. Mary listens politely, offering nods and soft smiles, though she contributes little. She prefers to observe rather than add to the murmured speculation. Instead, she lets her eyes wander across the horizon where the sun tries, unsuccessfully, to break through the haze. Everything glows faintly gold, as if illuminated from behind a thin curtain. You travel with her for the final stretch into Washington, D.C., where the fog dulls the city's usual noise. The streets appear subdued, the stone buildings softened by the moisture in the air. Even the Capitol dome looks gentler, its edges blurred as though sketched in graphite. Mary steps down from the carriage with quiet determination, her boots touching the ground as if marking the beginning of her role in this new unfolding chapter. She moves toward the administrative offices where she intends to volunteer. Though she has no military commission, she carries herself with the calm certainty of someone who understands her purpose. She moves through streets where soldiers, gray-blue silhouettes in the fog, pass in slow procession. Some carry stacks of papers, others crates or medical supplies. The mist softens every movement, turning the scene almost dreamlike. Mary pauses to watch a group of young recruits march by. Their footsteps echo faintly between buildings, muted as if softened by felt. You sense her compassion extending toward them, gentle as the drifting mist around her coat. Finally, she reaches the office to submit her request to serve as a surgeon. The clerk studies her papers, surprised, but not unkind, eyebrows rising at her qualifications. Mary stands with quiet pride, yet keeps her expression humble. She seeks no spectacle or recognition, only the work, the care, the chance to help. She steps back from the desk with a composed breath, patient as she is when tending her herb garden. In the days that follow, she carves her place within wartime Washington. Among lesser-known details of her early efforts is a makeshift station constructed from repurposed wooden crates, small sanctuary of clever practicality. You walk with her as she inspects each corner, noting the faint scent of old freight. Her hand glides over the planks with the same care she gives well-loved tools. She laughs softly, joking that the crates have traveled more miles than she ever has, making them the station's senior staff. The fog lingers through many mornings, wrapping the city in muted quiet that mirrors the steadiness in her heart. She moves through the mist with unhurried certainty, each step calmly etching itself into the pages of history softly, gently, without fanfare, yet fully present in her chosen work. You enter the building with her, the one that was never meant to become a hospital, never intended to cradle rows of beds beneath its high ceilings. The patent office stands with its old brick walls glowing softly in the light of evening, as though history itself were exhaling through their warm, worn surfaces. The great hall, once home to thousands of inventions and their hopeful diagrams, has transformed into a quiet refuge after the first battle of Bull Run. But Mary does not walk through chaos. She walks through a world softened by lamplight, where every sound arrives gently, wrapped in the hush of night. Her boots click lightly against the stone floor, the rhythm steady, unhurried. The oil lamps hanging along the walls emit a golden shimmer that pools across the room in slow-moving patches. Their flames sway with each subtle current of air, casting lacy shadows behind the columns. You watch Mary tilt her head slightly upward, acknowledging the symmetry of the hall, the long rows of soaring pillars, the lines of windows now covered with thin cloth to diffuse the light. Even in its temporary purpose, the building retains its dignity, and she seems to step into that dignity naturally, as though meeting an old friend. Along the rows of beds, nurses move like quiet silhouettes, their footsteps softened by layers of cloth. They nod to Mary as she passes, each greeting faint but sincere. She returns the gesture with a small smile, her expression calm and grounded. On nights like these, she radiates a sense of settled purpose. She is not swept up by urgency. Instead, she embraces the steady rhythm of work, guided by the flickering lamplight and the rustling of pages from her medical notes. In her coat pocket rests a small silver watch, an object often whispered about among the staff. No one knows where she obtained it. Some say it was a gift from a mentor during her earliest studies. Others believe it was found during her travels in Europe. A few imagine it was passed down through her family, its history folded into hers like a pressed herb in an old book. She never confirms any of these stories. She simply keeps the watch close, its soft ticking a private companion during her longest nights. When she checks the time, you notice how she holds it gently, as though the metal itself were fragile. The air inside the patent office carries the mild scent of old paper, mingled with the earthy smell of clean bandages drying on nearby racks. The mixture is strangely comforting. Above, the ceiling vanishes into shadow, yet the hall feels far from dark light filters in from every lamp, and every small flame set along desks and shelves. You can hear the faint, regular sound of a nurse dipping a pen into ink, followed by the soft whisper of writing. The notes, the constant documentation of arrivals, conditions, treatments, compose the nightly music of the hall, a metronome for those who serve here. Mary moves from bed to bed with her characteristic quiet attention. She adjusts blankets with careful hands, checks dressings with a steady gaze, and exchanges quiet nods with the other attendants. Though the building contains the aftermath of battle, she carries a peacefulness that touches everything around her. She never rushes, never startles. She allows the rhythm of the night to guide her, breathing in time with the slow swing of lamplight across the brick walls. You sense how her presence affects the space, the way nurses stand a little straighter when she approaches, the way conversations soften when she passes. At a small desk near one of the tall supporting columns, she places her notebook down and begins to write. The scratch of her pen blends into the gentle chorus of nightly sounds. Her handwriting is neat, the letters thoughtful and evenly spaced. She pauses occasionally, lifting her gaze toward the far wall, where early patent drawings still hang faded sketches framed beneath thin glass. She studies those old diagrams for a moment, perhaps drawing quiet strength from the ingenuity they represent. This building, once home to dreamers and mechanics and thinkers, now shelters a different kind of invention, the invention of resilience. And she, in her own way, contributes to that creation. Later, she walks to one of the high windows where the cloth curtains breathe in and out with each passing breeze. She lifts a corner slightly to let in a faint sliver of moonlight. Outside, the streets of Washington lie still, washed in a pale glow. The silence beyond the walls mirrors the calm inside, forming a cocoon around this place of care. The war may churn elsewhere, but here, within these brick boundaries, the night has settled into a gentle, unbroken flow. Across the large hall, lanterns hiss quietly as their wicks burn lower. Some nurses brew tea in a metal pot set above a small flame, the soft clinks of porcelain echoing faintly. Mary accepts a cup when they offer it to her, the steam rising in elegant spirals. She cradles the cup between her palms and lets the warmth seep into her skin. Around her, The quiet murmurs of conversation drift like low tides observations about supplies, about letters from home, about the names they need to record before the night ends. After finishing her tea, she returns to her station made from repurposed wooden crates, her small corner in the vast hall. Her fingers trace the smooth edges, recalling the days she assembled them in Washington. Once carriers of distant goods, the crates now hold medical records, jars of dried herbs, and her small oil lamp. Lighting it, warm light spills across her hands, highlighting the silver watch beside her notes. Hours pass softly. Shadows stretch and shrink along brick walls as lamplight moves with her careful work. Night feels like a long, gentle breath rather than weighty darkness. She checks her watch, then closes her notebook, letting the quiet hum of the building, the scent of herbs and paper, the steady writing of pens wrap around her. In this serene corner, Mary works with patient persistence, letting each night unfold calmly beneath softly glowing lamps. You watch her dress in the quiet of early morning, when the air is still cool, and the first hints of daylight brush against the edges of the room. Mary stands before a small wooden mirror, its surface slightly fogged from the night air. Her movements are steady, graceful in a way that feels entirely unforced. She lifts the uniform jacket and officer's cut, though subtly altered, and lets the weight of the fabric settle across her palms for a moment, before sliding her arms through the sleeves. The room seems to inhale with her, then exhale as the jacket falls neatly along her frame. The cloth is a deep, thoughtful shade, softened by use, but kept immaculately clean. The surface lies smooth beneath her fingers, each seam pressed patiently the night before. She has always cared about movement, how fabric should flow with the body, not restrict it, and the uniform reflects this philosophy in every line. Though modeled after an officer's coat, it carries her personal revisions, quiet acts of independence stitched into its construction. She reaches for the shoulder seams where she once adjusted the pattern herself. Though few people know it, she had taken apart those sections late one night and sewn them back using lighter fabric, making the coat more comfortable during long hours of work. Someone later wrote about it, an anecdote shared in near whisper, half admiration, half curiosity, but Mary never mentioned it openly. She simply wore the uniform the way she needed it to be worn. As she buttons the front, each click of brass meeting its counterpart feels like part of a familiar ritual. The cuffs fall just above her wrists, leaving room for her sleeves to move freely when she reaches across a table or bends to check a patient. The trousers, another quiet rebellion, fit her with practiced ease. She adjusts the waistband slightly, smoothing the fabric until it drapes neatly along her boots. You can almost feel the calm pride radiating from her, not boastful but grounded, like someone who knows exactly who she is when she dresses this way. Around her, the morning settles with a soft, deliberate calm, as if pausing to take in her presence. A small lantern flickers on the table nearby, its warm glow reaching toward her uniform in slow, thoughtful breaths. The light catches on the threads woven into the fabric, making them shimmer with a subtle, almost reverent gleam. It glides across the smooth contour of her shoulders, highlighting the steady structure that shapes her posture. It follows the clean, disciplined line of the jacket's front, where every fold seems placed with purpose, then drifts downward to the gentle gathers at the seams of her trousers, where comfort meets precision. Every detail of her attire carries a quiet statement. It speaks of deliberate design, of clothing made not merely to cover, but to accompany, to allow movement without hesitation, to preserve dignity without rigidity, and to hold an air of calm authority without the need for a single spoken word. She moves with an ease that reveals how carefully she has shaped this clothing to suit her needs. When she leans forward to inspect the small kit of instruments on her desk, the uniform shifts with her in a fluid ripple, the fabric folding and unfolding in soft waves. No stiffness, no heavy drag, just gentle cooperation between cloth and motion. You can almost hear the whisper of the fabric brushing against itself, a soothing rustle that accompanies her every step. Outside, the early light spreads slowly over the landscape, filtering through the window in wide, pale ribbons. It touches the back of her coat, tracing faint highlights along the seams she reinforced by hand. The air smells faintly of dew and the crispness that hangs between night and day. Mary takes a deep breath, and for a moment, the room feels still, as though time briefly pauses to recognize the significance of the image she forms. This woman in a uniform she has claimed and shaped as her own. She lifts her chin slightly, studying her reflection. The trousers, tailored for her stride. The jacket, resting lightly on her shoulders, thanks to her quiet revisions. The boots, polished not for display, but for durability. Her posture is relaxed, yet unmistakably confident. It is the confidence of someone who has spent years learning to move freely, who has rejected garments that confined her, who now dresses in a way that supports the work she feels called to do. A soft breeze slips through the cracked window, lifting the edge of her jacket. The fabric sways gently, almost like the slow movement of a curtain in a peaceful room. You notice how the uniform, though structured, still responds gracefully to the air, its folds shifting with a practiced elegance. Mary smooths the front of her coat one last time, pressing her palms gently across the fabric, as though acknowledging the miles she will walk in it. She picks up her small satchel, a dark leather bag, worn but trustworthy, and slips the strap across her chest. The coat molds around it without resistance. With a final glance in the mirror, she nods to herself, not in pride, but in steady readiness. Then she steps outside. The morning light greets her fully now, catching along the edges of her uniform and illuminating the details she crafted with care. The trousers move with her as she walks down the path, each step measured and sure. The jacket sways lightly at her sides, rising and falling with her breath. She looks composed, resolute, and entirely at ease in her chosen attire. In that calm, sunlit moment, her uniform transcends mere clothing. It becomes a quiet declaration of confidence, purpose, and selfhood, each thoughtful alteration a deliberate act of care. As she walks, the gentle sway of fabric mirrors her steady rhythm, a subtle echo of her inner resolve. Here, independence reveals itself not in grand gestures, but in small, intentional choices, like shaping one's attire to fit both body and spirit. Each step affirms that even simple decisions can carry profound meaning, grounding her freedom in practical, tangible form. The day begins not with urgency, but with a kind of muted steadiness that settles over the field hospital like a thin layer of morning mist. Before anything else, Mary steps into the open-air tent, letting the soft light of dawn guide her movements. She breathes in the scent of canvas warmed by early sun, of herbs hung to dry overnight, of paper and ink waiting at her desk. The camp is quiet at this hour, only the faint clatter of tin kettles and the whisper of distant footsteps accompany her. After more than 2 years working in these shifting outposts, she has come to recognize the rhythm of this life, a rhythm made of slow, steady pulses rather than abrupt shocks. She makes her way along the rows of cots arranged neatly beneath the wide, arching tents. Sunbeams filter through the seams, forming thin golden lines across the rugged ground. Each beam moves gently with the breeze, sweeping over blankets and wooden crates as if brushing dust from a forgotten hallway. Mary pauses to check the angle of a lantern left from the night before, nudging it upright with calm efficiency. Her hands move with practiced confidence, each gesture composed, unhurried. Even the air seems to respond to her presence, settling around her as if acknowledging her steadfast energy. As she begins her morning tasks, the rumor that still circulates among the nurses drifts into your thoughts, the quiet claim that Mary sometimes hums while she works. It's said that her voice is soft enough to blend into the fabric of the day, barely rising above the rustle of canvas or the clink of glass bottles. She never confirms the stories, and no written account of her own mentions it. Still, there are those who insist they heard her a faint tune, steady and soothing, as she sorted instruments or updated her notes. Some historians argue these memories may have grown with time, stretching into legend. Others maintain they were glimpses of her private way of finding calm in relentless circumstances. Today, you listen carefully. The sky is pale and wide above the tents, and a breeze moves gently through the open flaps, carrying with it the scent of wild grass. As Mary bends to prepare a small table with supplies, there is indeed a faint sound, a barely audible thread of melody woven between her breaths. Whether it is a tune or simply the rhythm of her movements, it is difficult to tell. But it softens the morning, like the low hum of a kettle warming slowly over a fire. She works with an internal cadence that seems to shape the space around her, calming even the distant shadow of the camp. She adjusts the straps of her uniform, the fabric folding lightly with her motion. The coat, tailored to her needs and habits, moves fluidly as she reaches for clean cloths. She arranges everything with the attention of someone who understands that order itself can be a form of comfort. The wooden tables, assembled from mismatched planks, hold jars of salve she prepared earlier in the week, their tops wrapped neatly in cotton. Nearby, a stack of notes rests beneath a small stone to keep them from the wind. When she sits to write, her pen glides across the page in long, gentle strokes. The field hospital, though temporary, has its own personality, a blend of open air, shifting light, and the faint echo of footsteps passing over dry earth. Birds call occasionally from the trees just beyond the tents, their voices crisp and clear in the mid-morning calm. Mary listens with a slight upward tilt of her head before returning to her work. She keeps her movements even, never rushed, as though she trusts the day to unfold at its own pace. When she steps outside to gather herbs from the small patch growing at the edge of the camp, the sunlight deepens around her. The leaves rustle lightly as she touches them, selecting only what is needed. Her satchel hangs at her side, opening and closing with a soft leather whisper. She pauses to study the sky, measuring light and the day's mood, her steady gaze lending calm even to shifting, restless shadows. As she returns, a few of the nurses nod to her. One offers a small copper cup of warm tea, steam curling upward like pale silk. Mary accepts it with a gentle "thank you," her voice low and steady. They know her well enough now to sense her rhythm, the way she anchors the entire camp with her presence. She drinks slowly, letting the warmth settle into her hands before placing the cup aside. The afternoon drifts in with wider light and longer shadows. The air grows warmer, and the tents breathe softly with the wind. Mary continues her work with the same deliberate calm, her steps light across the packed earth. Whether or not she hums again remains uncertain. The memory of the morning melody lingers, though perhaps it was imagination shaped by the camp's quiet mood. Historians still debate whether those who claim to hear her were recounting faithful recollections, or adding a soft halo around her story. But standing here, watching her work beneath the sunlit canvas, you understand why the legend persists. There is a quiet music in the way she moves, how she sets instruments down with care, folds cloth with practiced patience, and arranges supplies with deliberate attention. Each motion forms its own gentle rhythm, a cadence that quietly steadies the field hospital day after day, through the ebb and flow of uncertainty and the shifting seasons. In this enduring tempo, she becomes more than a caregiver. She is a guiding presence, a steadying force whose calm permeates the space. Her movements, measured yet fluid, infuse the camp with grace and resilience, and an unspoken authority rooted in care. The atmosphere itself seems to respond, settling into the pattern she establishes, as if the warm glow of late afternoon light had been captured and held in the steadiness of her hands, and the patient rhythm of her work, sustaining all around her with gentle constancy. The afternoon settles gently over the small administrative cabin. where light filters through thin window panes in long, pale stripes. Dust motes drift lazily in the sunbeams, rising and falling as if carried by an unseen tide. Mary steps inside with her usual calm, the ends of her coat brushing lightly against the wooden floor. A scent of old paper ink and faint traces of pine sap lingers in the air, a familiar combination in these makeshift offices scattered across military camps. On the desk before her lies a neat stack of documents. The edges curl slightly, as though time itself has touched them with a soft hand. A dried leaf, blown in from the open door, lands atop the papers and spins slowly, its motion delicate, almost ceremonial. Mary pauses to gently lift the leaf away, her fingers brushing the fragile veins as she places it beside the ink bottle. It feels like an omen of the season's shift, of a quiet turning point. It is September of 1863, another month in a long cascade of months spent in service, and yet today holds a particular stillness. The clerk who summoned her nods politely, aware that this moment carries a certain weight, even if the room remains free of spectacle. He pushes the documents forward, their crisp headers marked with official lettering. The assignment is clear. Mary Edwards. Walker is to be appointed as a contract acting assistant surgeon to the 52nd Ohio Infantry Regiment. There is no dramatic announcement, no flourish of trumpets. Instead, the recognition arrives in the quiet scratch of signatures and the soft rustle of documents being placed in order. Mary reads through each page carefully, her steady eyes tracing every line. The ink glistens faintly where it has dried unevenly, an imperfection she finds quietly endearing. When she signs her own name, the nib of the pen moves with practiced ease, leaving a gentle flourish at the end almost by habit. What few people know, what history often glosses over, is the small wooden box she keeps tucked safely at the bottom of her satchel. It is carved from dark walnut, each edge smoothed by time and handling. Her initials are etched on the lid in letters tidy and assertive. She has carried the box since her earliest days in the medical profession, collecting small papers, notes, and documents that track the winding path of her career. Some say she kept every contract, every letter of assignment, every scrap of recognition, not out of pride, but out of a desire to honor the labor behind each step. As the clerk finishes organizing the papers, Mary opens the box just long enough to place these new documents inside, smoothing them flat against the others. The gesture is gentle, almost reverent. She closes the lid with a soft click, the sound barely audible beneath the whispering breeze that slips through the open doorway. Outside, another leaf skims across the ground, tumbling end over end before disappearing into the grass. The afternoon deepens. Shadows lengthen across the wooden boards, forming slow-moving patterns that shift with the light. Mary stands quietly, allowing the moment to settle. She knows the assignment means more responsibility, more long days, and more steady hours spent under canvas tents. But it also brings a certain affirmation, an acknowledgement of her growing role in a world that has not always known where to place her. She steps outside, the wooden box secure in her satchel. The air meets her with a cool touch, carrying the faint scent of dried leaves and distant smoke from a cooking fire. The camp stretches before her, tents rising like soft humps across the landscape. In the near distance, someone calls out instructions, though their voice remains calm, blending with the quiet murmur of afternoon activity. Mary walks toward her tent, her steps unhurried. With each movement, the dried leaves scattered along the ground rustle gently, shifting around her boots. She takes a moment to sit at her small wooden table, where another leaf brown and curled has drifted in through the gap in the tent flap. She doesn't move it, allowing it to rest beside her papers like a companion to this new chapter. The folder containing her assignment lies open before her, the pages illuminated by the soft light filtering through the canvas. She reads the header again, though she knows the words by heart now. The ink strokes appear calm, deliberate, much like the rhythm she has cultivated through years of quiet persistence. Somewhere nearby, the wind moved through the trees, producing a gentle rustle that resembles the soft turning of pages in a book. Mary pauses in her work, listening to the subtle rhythm, letting it settle around her like a quiet companion. She lifts her pen with practiced ease and jots a brief note into her logbook, each stroke deliberate, precise, and steady as ever. Once the entry is complete, she closes the folder carefully, her fingers lingering for a moment as she smooths the surface, ensuring everything is neat and in order. The small ritual feels grounding, a quiet affirmation of her presence, patience, and methodical care, blending seamlessly into the gentle rhythm of her surroundings. The moment feels simple, understated, and yet undeniably significant. Recognition, she thinks, does not always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly in ink traced on pages, in the gentle weight of papers laid into a treasured wooden box, in the calm embrace of new duties, all unfolding beneath a sky where leaves drift slowly, carried by the soft autumn air. With that thought, she sets the box aside, letting the calm rhythm of the field guide her. Evening settles softly around her, each movement measured and deliberate, as she prepares for what comes next, carried forward by the steady, unhurried cadence of her work and surroundings. The late afternoon light drifts gently across the rolling hills, brushing the long grass with a soft golden sheen. You walk along a narrow dirt road, its surface smooth from years of quiet footsteps rather than hurried travel. The breeze that comes down from the distant ridges carries a hint of cool mountain air, clean and steady, like a calm reminder that even in uncertain times, the land continues breathing at its own patient pace. A small laugh escapes you as a stray leaf dances across your path, as if trying to race you downhill, despite having no legs, nature's way of showing off. You follow the curve of the road toward a valley where scattered cabins nestle among the green folds of the hills. It is a region under the control of the opposing side, though the landscape makes no judgment. The civil war rages in the distance, but here, the soundscape remains soft, a few birds calling overhead, the gentle rustle of shrubs stirred by the wind, and somewhere far off, the faint trickle of a creek winding through stones. The world feels steady, unhurried, and deeply human. Mary Edwards Walker steps across the invisible line between territories, her footsteps light, her gaze steady. Her role as a physician has led her here again, into a zone marked on military maps as dangerous, but marked in her heart as necessary. The historical record tells us that she frequently crossed into areas controlled by the Confederacy, treating civilians who had no one else to depend on. To her, illness respected no allegiance, and neither did her compassion. She moves along the dirt path, her medical bag resting against her hip with each step. The scent of pine drifts on the wind, mixing with the earthy smell of the road. When she pauses to reorganize a few bandages that have shifted inside her bag, the breeze brushes against her sleeves, nudging the loose fabric like a patient trying to get her attention. She smiles softly at the thought, amused that even the wind can be a little needy at times. The first cabin she visits is tucked just beneath a slope, its wooden beams weathered but sturdy. The family welcomes her with quiet gratitude. Inside, the room is dim, lit by a single oil lamp that casts gentle shadows along the walls. Mary checks on a child recovering from a persistent fever, her movements slow and reassuring. She murmurs observations to herself as she works, the calm rhythm of her voice soothing enough that even the anxious family dog curls up peacefully at her feet. As she steps back outside, the sunlight has deepened into a warm amber. She continues along the valley path, knowing there is another home waiting for her assistance. Here, history holds a gentle mystery. Many tales tell of an elderly man who lived alone on the far side of these hills, an avid reader who kept a small but treasured collection of books. When conflict swept through the region, he feared they would be taken or destroyed. According to old accounts, Mary helped him hide the entire collection, moving them in small bundles under the cover of early dawn. Some say the effort went on for months, the two of them working together with a quiet determination. The man's gratitude, they say, lasted until his final days. No one knows for certain how many books were rescued, nor where they were eventually hidden. But the legend lingers, carried like a soft rumor through the hills. You imagine Mary stepping into the man's small cabin, seeing the shelves nearly bare, and sensing his worry before he even speaks. She would have set her medical bag down, rolled up her sleeves, and offered a solution as calmly as if she were prescribing a remedy. Perhaps she even joked lightly that carrying books counted as the day's exercise, sparing her from jogging up the ridge, which, she might add, she would never willingly do unless chased by a very motivational squirrel dot as evening edges in. The shadows stretch slowly across the valley. Mary ascends a gentle rise in the landscape, and when she reaches the top, she pauses to breathe in the view. Below her, the hills undulate in soft shades of green and brown, fading into the mist that pools near the low points. The air brushes against her face with the crispness of approaching dusk. She continues down the opposite slope, her feet tracing the winding dirt path toward another cabin. Each step is deliberate, steady, and unhurried, her presence carrying no threat, only a quiet determination to reach those who need her care. With every visit, every conversation, every gentle touch of reassurance, she quietly reinforces a truth the land itself seems to echo. In times of uncertainty, kindness moves silently, crossing boundaries with ease and leaving a lasting impression without demand or fanfare. The breeze lifts again as she walks, carrying the scent of distant pine mingled with the earthy perfume of fallen leaves. The soft whisper of foliage brushing the ground blends with the rhythmic tap of her boots on the dirt path, creating a subtle cadence that mirrors the calm, steady pulse of her intentions. Shadows lengthen slowly across the hillside, painting muted patterns over the rolling terrain. She follows the winding route until the last light of day slips behind the distant hills, the world folding into a calm almost timeless in its quiet. Through it all, she remains steady, guided by purpose, shaped by compassion, and fully attuned to the lives around her. Each step she takes is measured and deliberate, a continuation of the care she has cultivated. She moves with quiet resolve, always prepared to reach out to someone who needs her, leaving a trail of gentle reassurance in her wake. You step lightly along the cobbled pathway that leads to Castle Thunder, where history whispers through the cold stone walls. The year is 1864, and though the castle once served as a stronghold, now it holds a quieter, more reflective energy. Mary Edwards Walker enters with measured steps, the soles of her boots echoing softly against the uneven stones. Each step seems to stretch time, slowing the world to a rhythm dictated by stone and shadow, rather than urgency or fear. Inside, the walls are gray and solid, the texture rough beneath your fingertips if you brush against them. The air carries a cool stillness, mingled with the faint scent of old mortar and aged timber. Through the high, narrow windows, sunlight filters in, forming sharp beams that cut across the floor in golden slices. Dust particles drift lazily in these rays, like tiny dancers suspended in the quiet air. Every corner of the room seems to hold a memory, each stone a silent witness to countless footsteps. Mary finds her place among the shadows, the light shifting across her figure as she moves slowly along the corridor. The castle hums softly with the wind, which slips through cracks in the walls and whistles through narrow slits. The sound is almost musical, a gentle accompaniment to the stillness. Somewhere in the distance, a faint clatter echoes a door swung by itself, or perhaps a loose shutter outside, yet it carries no urgency, only the reminder that even in quiet, life moves steadily onward. The room assigned to her is small but orderly. Its walls are cold to the touch, and the floor beneath her feet is solid stone. There is a window barred with thick metal, through which a single shaft of sunlight falls, illuminating a corner of the chamber. The illumination casts geometric patterns on the floor, lines intersecting like sketches on a page. Mary takes a moment to study the angles, the space, and the way light interacts with structure. According to accounts, she used such time to sketch the layout of the rooms, mapping every detail of her surroundings. These drawings were more than pastime. They were exercises in observation and architecture, revealing a mind attentive to both precision and beauty. You notice how the light slowly moves, the sun tracing arcs across the floor and walls. It falls across a simple wooden table where she arranges her few belongings neatly. The grain of the wood is soft beneath her hands, worn smooth by repeated use. Nearby, a small stool rests against the wall, its surface polished by years of sitting. Every object is quiet, unassuming, yet together they create a sense of calm continuity amid a space that might otherwise feel imposing. Through the window bars, the world outside seems distant and slow. Trees sway lightly in the wind, their branches casting dappled shadows on the stone. The sunlight shifts in tandem with the hours, moving from floor to wall, creating a natural clock that measures time with subtle grace. Mary watches the play of light and shadow, tracing their patterns with a pencil when she feels inclined to record them. Her sketches capture not only the architecture, but the atmosphere, the interaction of solid stone with fleeting illumination. The soundscape is minimal, but alive, the whisper of wind through gaps, the faint creak of a shutter far above, the occasional drop of water from a high arch into the courtyard below. Each note resonates gently, blending with the rhythm of her breathing and the scratch of her pencil across paper. The combination of these elements, stone, light, and soft sound, forms an environment, both disciplined and meditative. Mary arranges herself by the window for a moment, letting the light fall across her face. The bars cast linear shadows along her coat, tracing patterns reminiscent of architectural diagrams. She lifts her notebook and pencil, tracing the walls and floors with steady lines, capturing the geometry of her temporary home. Some accounts mention that she found solace in these sketches, a form of quiet engagement that transformed the space from confinement into study. Even the smallest details, the angle of a door, the texture of a stone, the way light shifts across a corner, are observed with patient care. Outside, the wind rustles faintly, carrying leaves along the cobbled path and brushing softly against the castle walls. The cold stone absorbs the motion, yet releases it gently into the air, a quiet echo of activity against stillness. As the day progresses, shadows lengthen and soften. The sunlight through the bars shifts from sharp lines to gentle washes of gold. Dust motes hover in the diminishing beams, shimmering subtly. Mary continues her observations, occasionally turning pages to compare one sketch to another. In this meditative rhythm, the castle ceases to feel entirely as a place of restraint. Instead, it becomes a sanctuary for focus, a space in which attention to detail transforms a stone room into a classroom of light, shadow, and quiet reflection. Night approaches slowly. The last rays of sun dip below the horizon, leaving the room bathed in a soft twilight glow. The wind's whisper through the walls continues, a gentle companion as she closes her notebook and sets her pencil aside. The bars remain solid, the stones unyielding, yet the space feels tranquil, almost alive in its own slow, patient way. Mary rises and stretches lightly, the fabric of her coat moving fluidly against her frame. She pauses at the window, letting the cool evening air brush across her face. The room, the shadows, and the light, all of it remains timeless and unhurried, holding both history and quiet presence together, here within these walls. She walks softly through the interplay of stone and sun, leaving traces only in pencil and memory, while the wind carries whispers of castle thunder into the coming night. The morning air was brittle, sharp with the promise of late August's approaching chill. Dawn broke slowly over the horizon, painting the world in muted shades of gray and gold. Every breath came as a fleeting plume of white, dissipating quickly into the thin winter air that had begun to creep early into the northern landscape. The ground, still firm from the summer warmth, carried a faint frost that glittered under the low sun, a delicate lacework of nature's design. She walked steadily along the narrow path toward the rendezvous point for the prisoner exchange, her boots crunching softly on frost-tinged soil. In her hands she carried a small, unassuming bundle, a single dry branch, gnarled and bare, yet held with a care that suggested it was more than mere wood. The branch had accompanied her through the months of confinement, a silent witness to her isolation, and now, even as freedom edged closer, it remained steadfastly at her side. The river, swollen from recent rains, reflected the pale sunlight like a sheet of molten silver. Along its banks, the morning fog lingered stubbornly, curling around the reeds and the roots of trees that leaned toward the water as if to drink from its surface. Her breath, a steady rhythm of white in the air, seemed almost loud in the quiet expanse. Even the occasional call of a distant bird felt sharp against the emptiness, cutting through the soft hush that had settled over the land dot as she approached the gathering point. The figures of soldiers began to emerge through the mistmen wrapped in coarse coats, their movements slow with the same cold that had settled into her bones. Voices carried faintly over the river, words of protocol and identification, measured and precise. The air between them was taut with anticipation, the unspoken acknowledgement of months of separation and the weight of the war that had carved its mark into every gesture, every glance. The exchange itself was brief, almost clinical in its execution. Names were spoken, papers checked, and identities confirmed. Yet beneath the surface of procedure lay an unspoken gravity, the gravity of lives suspended, of days measured in uncertainty, of hours stretched long by the absence of familiar faces. When her name was finally called, the sound seemed almost unreal, a fragile note breaking through the heavy quiet. She stepped forward, her movements deliberate, feeling the frost bite at her cheeks. The soldiers extended their hands, offering support across the boundary of captivity, a bridge constructed of mutual relief and weary respect. For a moment, the cold seemed to recede, replaced by the sudden, quiet warmth of recognition of being seen again, of being returned to a world that had continued in her absence. Outside the immediate confines of the exchange, the landscape stretched into a thin, wintry clarity. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that slanted across fields and roads, softening the stark lines of bare branches against the sky. The river, now glinting more brightly as the fog lifted, mirrored the scene, a frozen reflection of the fragile peace that had been brokered, however temporary, by human hands. She continued her walk away from the river, the dry branch still in her grasp. It seemed almost symbolic now, a thread connecting the months behind her to the days ahead. Each step carried her further from the tight confines of Castle Thunder and the formalities of the exchange, deeper into the thin, biting air of a world reshaped by absence. The frost crunched beneath her boots like whispers of forgotten time, a steady accompaniment to the soft rhythm of her pulse dot in the quiet moments between breaths. She noticed the subtle details, the frost edging the tips of grass, the way the low sun glinted off a solitary icicle clinging to a fence post, the curling smoke of distant chimneys drifting lazily into the sky. These were signs of life continuing, persistent and resilient. Even as the past lingered like the shadow of her own breath in the morning air dot, by the time she reached the edge of the clearing, the sun had lifted slightly, lending a touch of warmth to the frost-bitten landscape. Her lungs still drew in the sharp air, each inhale a reminder of the fragile balance between hardship and relief. The branch in her hands was now more than a relic. It was a talisman, a companion that had endured, silent but steadfast, through the thin winter air that had accompanied both imprisonment and release. The day stretched before her, pale and quiet, promising more cold, yet softened by the subtle golden light that hinted at hope. With each step, she felt the weight of the weeks behind her lift fractionally, replaced by the cautious optimism of return. The river flowed steadily beside her, a continuous hum beneath the thin winter sun, and the frost began to melt in delicate streams. Joining the current in quiet celebration of endurance, she did not yet speak of what awaited her. For now, simply walking, feeling her boots press into the cold earth, breathing the crisp winter air, carrying her faithful branch was enough. Each step held its own quiet significance, a reclamation of both land and self. The world had shifted, vast and unyielding, but so had she, shaped by experience, resilience, and the gentle accumulation of small acts of courage. The thin winter air pressed sharply against her cheeks, biting yet invigorating, reminding her of the edge between hardship and hope. Still, within that chill lingered a subtle promise that life would endure, even amidst discomfort. That memory, while heavy with sorrow, could also sustain perseverance. With each forward motion, she embraced this paradox, carrying both the weight of the past and the quiet anticipation of what was yet to come, moving with calm determination through the fragile, luminous landscape of winter. The afternoon sun filtered gently through the wooden blinds, casting a warm, golden pattern across the floorboards of the small, orderly room. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, catching the light and lingering in the still air, as if savoring the calm that had finally settled after years of upheaval. The room was modest, its walls lined with shelves that held books, letters, and small mementos of a life gradually reclaimed from history's turbulence. At the center of it all, a simple wooden table stood polished and sturdy, a silent witness to countless quiet moments. It was here, in this unassuming space, that the medal had found its home. The Medal of Honor, awarded in 1865 by President Andrew Johnson himself, rested upon a soft velvet cushion, gleaming faintly in the golden light. Its presence was unassuming yet profound, a quiet testament to courage recognized, not with fanfare, but with a gentle, enduring dignity. She had carried it carefully from the White House, through the streets of the recovering capital, and now it lay with her, a companion in the stillness of her own room. Evenings were her favorite time in this sanctuary. The sun's low arc transformed the wooden walls into shades of amber and honey, and the shadows stretched long and slow, curling like fingers along the floor. Each night, without fail, she would place the medal beside her bed, just within reach, a nightly ritual both of remembrance and humility. The cushion it rested upon had softened over time, shaped by the quiet care with which she handled it. And yet it had never dulled the faint brilliance of the honor it represented. The air in the room was calm, tinged with the faint scent of pine from the polished floorboards and the warmth of sunlight that had soaked the walls throughout the day. There was a rhythm here, steady and reassuring, the gentle tick of a small clock, the rustle of paper as she turned letters or journals, the occasional whisper of wind against the window. Each sound was a reminder that life, though once punctuated by uncertainty and upheaval, had returned to a gentle cadence. Sitting at the table, she often allowed herself moments of reflection, tracing the edges of the metal with her fingertips. The engraving caught the light in subtle ways, the gold surface warm under her touch. She remembered the day it had been placed in her hands, the solemnity of the ceremony, the quiet pride in President Johnson's eyes, the acknowledgement of endurance in service that transcended the pomp of politics. Yet now, in the sanctuary of her room, the medal had become more than an award. It was a companion of memory, a symbol of trials endured, and of a world steadily moving forward. The room's wooden walls seemed to absorb the light, radiating it back in soft hues that made the space feel larger than it was, yet intimately contained. There was a sense of peace here, a soft affirmation that, despite the turbulence of past years, there existed a corner of the world untouched by conflict or urgency. She would often pause in these moments, simply breathing in the warm, amber glow, feeling the calm settle into her shoulders, her chest, her hands. And always, the medal rested nearby, a silent anchor in a life otherwise quiet and simple. Visitors, though rare, were welcomed with a gentle warmth. They would comment on the medal, its brightness, its historical significance, but she never spoke of it with pride or boast. Instead, she would smile softly, letting the object speak for itself. The story embedded in its surface, the honor it carried, the countless days and nights that had led to its quiet placement beside her bed. There was no need for ceremony here. The room itself, suffused with sunlight and the gentle weight of memory, provided all the recognition that mattered. At times, she would write letters or record her reflections in a leather-bound journal, the pen scratching softly against paper as the sunlight shifted through the room. Her thoughts wandered to the months of confinement, to the winter air after the prisoner exchange, to the endless days of waiting and uncertainty. And yet now, all of it seemed held in a delicate balance, the medal a bridge between past and present, between trials endured and peace quietly claimed. Night fell gradually, and with it the light softened further, mellowed into the gentle gold of twilight. Shadows thickened, curling around the corners of the room, yet the space retained a calm clarity, as though the day's warmth had seeped into every surface, leaving a lingering comfort. The medal glimmered faintly in the diminishing light, still resting on its velvet cushion beside the bed, a quiet sentinel in the hush of evening. Before sleep, she would often place her hand over it, feeling the smooth metal beneath her fingers. It was not a gesture of vanity, nor a claim of achievement, but a personal acknowledgement of endurance and survival, of courage witnessed and recognized. The room, bathed in soft amber light, seemed to exhale with her, holding the quiet story of the medal, of the years behind her, and of the gentle life she had carved from the remnants of history. In this wooden sanctuary. The world outside, the noise, the urgency, the echoes of war felt distant and softened. Here, the Medal of Honor rested with quiet dignity, and she, with her calm breath and steady hands, honored it in return. Each night, the ritual repeated, a small but profound act, a placement of a medal, a reflection of courage, a whisper of peace, and the assurance that even amidst the long shadows of history, there was room for quiet honor and lasting serenity. The lecture halls were never grand, yet they held a quiet dignity, much like the woman who moved through them. Each room, from modest town halls to university chambers, bore witness to her calm voice and steady gaze. The afternoon light, filtered through tall windows, often caught the edges of her carefully pinned coat, where a single violet rested against the lapel. Some historians still debate whether this choice of flower was symbolic, a subtle nod to resilience and humility, or merely her personal preference. Either way, the violet became a silent companion to her words, recurring in accounts from students, listeners, and fellow reformers alike. Her lectures, though delivered with gentle composure, carried weight beyond the spoken syllables. She spoke of women's right to vote, of reforms in dress that balanced practicality with dignity, of the legal recognition of property and inheritance rights for women. Each point was articulated with patient clarity, supported by examples and historical precedent, yet never shouted or demanded. Her strength was in quiet persistence, the ability to guide minds rather than command them, to sow ideas with care, so that they might take root and flourish. Audiences varied. Some came curious, expecting a conventional address. Others arrived skeptical, prepared to challenge or dismiss her arguments. But few left unchanged. There was a rhythm to her presence, hands often resting lightly on the podium, eyes moving steadily across the room, a slight tilt of the head when emphasizing a point. Her voice was calm, measured, yet carried a natural authority that invited attention. Listeners noted, too, the subtle violet tucked beside her heart, which seemed to soften the firmness of her message without diminishing its resolve. Between lectures, she wrote extensively. Notes, drafts, and letters covered the wooden desk in her study, a space warmed by sunlight filtering through curtains and lined with shelves of books on law, history, and social reform. Here, she connected with reformers across the country, exchanged ideas on voting rights, and debated strategies for changing entrenched attitudes toward women's independence. The work was demanding, but never frantic. Her approach mirrored the style she carried to the podium, deliberate, composed, and quietly persuasive. It was not only public reform she championed. She sought to change daily life, urging practical shifts in clothing that allowed mobility and comfort, while still honoring personal dignity. She discussed the economic realities of property ownership and inheritance, guiding audiences through legal structures and historical precedents, making complex concepts accessible without condescension. Over time, these lectures began to weave a broader tapestry, one where women's autonomy, both public and private, could coexist with social grace and moral responsibility. Travel between engagements was a constant rhythm in her later years. Small towns, cities, and university campuses became stages for her steady advocacy. At each stop, she carried not only her notes and pamphlets, but also the quiet symbol of the violet. Attendees remarked upon it, curious or charmed by the consistency of the gesture. Scholars later speculated on its meaning. Was it an emblem of modesty, a coded message of resilience, or simply a personal comfort? She never clarified, leaving the violet to remain both intimate and enigmatic. Evenings were spent reflecting, often by a window where the fading light turned the room amber and soft. Her desk, once covered in papers, now held letters of encouragement, requests for guidance, and notes of gratitude from women she had inspired. She read them slowly, a small smile occasionally touching her lips. The violet, whether on her desk or in her coat the next day, seemed to embody these quiet triumphs, a subtle reminder that influence could be gentle, consistent, and enduring. In quieter moments, she remembered the months of struggle and confinement from earlier years, the thin winter air, and the disciplined endurance that had led to recognition and eventual freedom. That history, though distant, informed every lecture, every argument, every carefully chosen phrase. It lent credibility and depth, reminding audiences that reform was not an abstract idea, but a lived reality, shaped by courage and perseverance over time. Her colleagues noted a certain rhythm in her advocacy. She never rushed, never demanded immediate acclaim, but allowed ideas to unfold, to simmer, and to take hold. This persistence, combined with the grace of her manner, allowed her influence to grow steadily. Over decades, she became a fixture in reform circles, her name synonymous with thoughtful advocacy, resilience, and gentle leadership. The violet, in this context, became more than adornment. It was a symbol, whether consciously or not, of the quiet persistence that defined her life's work. Letters and memoirs from students often mention the careful attention she gave to each person, to each question, to each hesitant voice in the room. She would respond with patience, guiding understanding without condescension, creating spaces where curiosity and courage could coexist. This approach, repeated day after day, town after town, lecture after lecture, became her enduring legacy. By nightfall, her study would be bathed in soft amber light, the glow wrapping around neatly arranged papers, open journals, and the ever-present violets sometimes resting beside a notebook, other times pinned to a coat for the next day's engagement. In this gentle domestic space, the pulse of history met the steady work of reform, quiet yet deliberate, shaped by a life that refused haste but never wavered. Each lecture delivered, each advocacy effort undertaken, every carefully placed flower contributed to a broader tapestry of persistence and grace. Her influence was subtle yet enduring, a testament to meaningful change pursued without spectacle, to guidance extended without force, and to progress carried forward with patient consistency. Even in the stillness of evening, her presence spoke volumes, of purpose sustained, of quiet diligence, and of a life lived with integrity and care, leaving a gentle, lasting imprint on the world around her. The morning light entered softly through the tall window, pale and diffused, touching the corners of the room with a gentle clarity. She sat in her familiar chair by the sill, her posture steady despite the slow grace of age, wearing a neatly pressed black vest that spoke of care and quiet discipline. Her hands rested lightly on the armrests, fingers folded as if in silent meditation. Outside, the world moved on, unaware of the subtle tensions within these walls, of history quietly revising itself, and of her serene resistance to its dictates. It was 1917, a year marked not by celebration, but by the delicate reshaping of past honors. Congress had passed a new law, revising the criteria for the Medal of Honor, and, in consequence, requiring the return of certain awards previously granted. The news arrived with the official decorum of bureaucracy letters, forms, and polite insistence. Yet in the room bathed in pale sunlight, the matter was met with calm consideration, not indignation or haste. She had, as always, approached events with measured thought. Near her, on the polished wooden table, lay a glass frame holding a copy of the newly printed criteria. It was pressed carefully, its edges aligned and straight, the letters crisp and legible. This document, emblematic of changing regulations, rested beside her as a quiet companion, much like the Medal of Honor had in decades past. There was no note of bitterness. She observed it with the same steady eye she had applied to history itself, noting the formal language, the requirements, the meticulous phrasing, and allowing the realities to settle gently around her. The medal, once gleaming against a velvet cushion, remained on its familiar place, now accompanied by the framed criteria. She did not move it, nor did she offer argument or complaint. Instead, she sat by the window, letting the thin light fall across the smooth metal and the glass, illuminating both in muted harmony. The day was still, with only the faint rustle of leaves beyond the pane and the occasional distant footfall echoing in the quiet street. Every detail, the polished floor, the warmth of sunlight, the subtle creak of the chair formed a gentle backdrop to her quiet refusal, a refusal not of confrontation, but of surrender. Visitors who called upon her in those months described the calm dignity with which she received them. She spoke softly of her work, of the lectures, of the reforms she had pursued with patience and perseverance. Yet when the subject turned to the medal and its newly revised status, she merely gestured to the framed criteria and allowed the silence to speak. No argument was necessary. Her steadfastness conveyed all that words might have. Some observers later remarked that this refusal was not rooted in pride, but in principle, the principle that recognition, once given for valor and service, retained a value beyond bureaucratic reinterpretation. Outside the window, sunlight shifted gradually, stretching the pale shadows across the wooden floor. The room seemed to hold its breath in reverence, as though time itself paused to honor the calm assertion of continuity in the face of change. Her black vest, precise and unwrinkled, mirrored the steadiness of her mind, the discipline of decades spent navigating both conflict and calm. Even as her hair thinned and hands bore the gentle traces of age, her posture and presence conveyed a serene authority that required no spectacled dot she often reflected. In these quiet hours, on the journey that had led to this moment, from the days of imprisonment and exchange, to lectures and advocacy, to nights with the medal resting beside her bed, each event had been threaded with purpose and perseverance. The 1917 directive was, in its way, another chapter, not one of erasure, but of adaptation, a test of equanimity. And she met it as always, with calm observation, steady hands, and a heart undisturbed by the transient motions of politics about some afternoons. She would trace the edge of the framed criteria with a fingertip, noting the words, the spacing, the formality. The gesture was gentle, deliberate, almost meditative. The document remained encased in glass, preserving it from time, as she had preserved her own sense of dignity. Nearby, the medal rested, catching the soft light in faint glimmers. A quiet companion as it had been through decades of lectures, travel, and reflection. The two objects, framed and unframed, formed a still life of principle and memory, of recognition and personal steadfastness. As evening approached, the light grew thinner, yet the room retained a calm clarity. She remained by the window, looking outward at the shifting sky and the quiet street, her black vest a contrast to the pale hues around her. No words were exchanged, for none were necessary. Her quiet refusal, unspoken but deeply understood, held its place in the room, as immovable and certain as the glass-encased criteria, as luminous as the medal itself. Night settled slowly, and with it a gentle hush filled the room. The candlelight or lamp remained unnecessary. The fading sunlight sufficed to illuminate the objects she had chosen to preserve. The medal, the criteria, and the woman herself were aligned in quiet harmony, each a witness to a life lived with thoughtfulness, endurance, and serene dignity. In this calm, reflective space, the world's demands official, historical, or political were met not with confrontation, but with the enduring presence of quiet principle. And in 1917, the medal stayed by her side, the framed criteria resting close, quietly observed yet untouched, a silent testament to her perseverance and the passage of time. She, seated in the soft, filtered light of the window, embodied the steadfast balance between recognition and personal integrity, a reminder that honor, once earned and deeply understood, need not bow to the fleeting tides of regulation or time. The wind carried a faint chill, the early January air crisp against her face. Pale sunlight slanted across the marble steps of the Capitol, softening their angles and turning the stone into a subtle canvas of light and shadow. Leaves, brittle from the passing autumn, whispered as they fell, tumbling slowly in small spirals before coming to rest on the worn steps. She walked carefully, each step deliberate, feeling the texture of the stone beneath her boots and the cool caress of the wind along her cheeks. It was a quiet morning, one of those rare moments where the city seemed to pause, holding its breath in respect for those who had walked its corridors before. She carried with her a small notebook, a familiar companion whose pages no one would later find. Its cover was worn, the edges softened by frequent handling, suggesting that within it lay thoughts, reflections, or perhaps private sketches of a life lived through courage, perseverance, and steady purpose. Her black vest was smooth and neat, the folds crisp against the pale light. The sun, though low, lent a soft warmth that contrasted with the brisk air, illuminating the fine lines of her hands and the gentle arch of her shoulders. She paused often, feeling the rhythm of her own breath, the subtle creak of the steps beneath her feet, the quiet murmur of the wind through the Capitol grounds. Each moment seemed stretched, deliberate, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate her presence. People passed at a distance. some noticing her with faint nods of recognition, others merely glimpsing a figure moving calmly against the muted architecture. No one approached, and none intruded upon the rhythm she maintained, a rhythm dictated by care, awareness, and the soft cadence of a life grown deliberate through years of endurance. She raised her eyes occasionally to the tall columns and the high dome above, sensing not grandeur, but a gentle continuity, the steady pulse of history carried forward by countless hands, some firm, some tentative, all intertwined with her own. The notebook remained close to her, held lightly against her side, a secret companion in these final walks. She had carried it through lectures, travels, and quiet evenings by a sunlit window, through moments of reflection and resistance, through decades of recognition and adjustment. Now it accompanied her up the steps, a silent witness to the calm dignity of her movement, to the muted sunlight that played over stone and leaf. Leaves shifted underfoot, scattering slightly as she stepped. The wind whispered in her ears, soft and gentle, carrying the scent of cold air and distant smoke from nearby chimneys. Each breath was a cloud in the chill, rising and dissolving quickly into the morning light. She paused on a landing, letting her gaze drift toward the horizon where pale buildings met sky. And for a brief moment, the world seemed entirely hers, serene, ordered, and suffused with quiet meaning. There was no haste, no urgency in her movements. Each step was a meditation, a gentle acknowledgement of years gone by, of triumphs and trials, of lectures given and medals placed with care. The violet she had often worn to symbolize persistence or personal affinity was absent, yet its memory lingered, as if the small gestures of a life could persist even without physical presence. She breathed in the crisp air, feeling its clarity, the subtle tension of cold against warmth, of sunlight against shadow, and allowed herself the calm pleasure of simple awareness. The capital steps were worn with countless footsteps, each groove and crease a reminder of passage and continuity. She touched the railing lightly, noting the smooth metal under her fingers, tracing the quiet contours with care. The wind tugged gently at her coat, lifting its folds, and she adjusted her posture, maintaining her deliberate rhythm. Everything moved slowly, her body, the air, the leaves. The light, yet in this slowness, there was a sense of fullness, a completeness. As if each small detail carried the weight of significance. It was said afterward that she slipped once, lightly, her foot catching on the edge of a step. But even that movement was gentle, the air absorbing the motion with quiet inevitability. She rose again, steadied herself, and continued, as though the act of walking, of being present in the world, required only the patience she had cultivated throughout a life of lectures, advocacy, and quiet perseverance. The notebook remained in her grasp, a vessel for thoughts that would remain unseen, a companion to a spirit that valued reflection above recognition. The sunlight shifted gradually, thinning and mellowing as the morning progressed. Shadows lengthened, leaves rustled softly, and the wind carried a subtle chill that hinted at winter's depth. She paused on a landing, looked down the steps, and let her eyes linger on the pale patterns of light and stone. The city around her moved on, yet she occupied a space apart, measured and serene, fully attuned to the cadence of her own presence. By the time she descended the final steps, the air had grown colder, and the sunlight softer, more diffuse. She moved with care, each footfall deliberate, her hands still lightly holding the small notebook. It was a final journey, quiet and composed, free of fanfare, yet imbued with the fullness of a life carefully lived. Leaves settled on the steps behind her, sunlight glimmered faintly across the stone, and the wind whispered its soft farewell when news of her gentle, final fall in 1919 reached them. Those who knew her recalled the calm dignity of that last walk. The notebook was never found, leaving a quiet mystery while on the Capitol steps, pale winter sunlight, drifting leaves, and soft wind carried the memory of her deliberate, persistent presence and serene, enduring finality. The pages of old records yellowed with age, the ink softened into gentle gray by time and light. In quiet libraries and hushed archives, the story of her life lingered between these worn sheets, flowing slowly across margins and notes, as though the very air around them slowed to honor her memory. For 58 years, her name had vanished from the official list of the Medal of Honor, a silence imposed by bureaucracy, yet the stillness carried its own kind of testimony. The world moved on, marching forward through wars, elections, and societal change, while her formal recognition remained suspended, hidden in absence. Yet even in those decades, fragments of her story traveled quietly, carried on whispered lectures in medical schools, quietly cited in histories of reform, or preserved by archivists who understood the subtle weight of persistence. Some records noted her courage in passing. Some journals hinted at her enduring influence, and in secret, many institutions kept her memory alive as inspiration. The silence of official lists became a space for reflection, a pause that allowed her true impact to unfold in unexpected ways, in rooms filled with dust motes and faint sunlight. Her legacy was recounted softly. Professors, historians, and students would speak of her life in hushed tones, as if careful language could contain the breadth of her deeds. Medical schools, in particular, seemed to carry an almost sacred respect, telling her story in private lectures as an emblem of quiet determination, of steadfast principle, and of moral courage that transcended recognition. Her name might have been erased from formal registers, but in these classrooms and archives, it lingered with a subtle power, shaping understanding and inspiring reflection. The 58 years stretched like a slow river, each year marked not by ceremony, but by the gentle accumulation of remembrance in unlikely places. She moved through history in absence, yet remained present in memory, her influence echoing in conversations, in copied letters, in references tucked into textbooks. The medal that had once rested proudly on a velvet cushion, the violet she had worn in lectures, the notebook always held close awe, became symbols that carried forward without fanfare, as if her essence had taken root in the spaces between records and memory. Time seemed to move differently in these decades. Each page turned, each entry read, carried the weight of stillness. Light filtered through library windows, casting shadows on the margins of documents, and the dust in the air floated in slow arcs, unhurried. It was as if the world itself acknowledged the pause imposed upon her recognition, allowing readers, scholars, and quiet observers to dwell on her life with deliberate care. Each sentence, each notation, became a small vessel for contemplation, echoing her steadiness and patience, qualities that had defined her existence long before her medal had been contested. Some historians later noted the peculiar rhythm of her story during this period. Though officially absent from honor rolls, her presence in cultural memory was persistent and subtle. Letters, teaching notes, and oral histories recorded glimpses of her life. The careful placement of medals and documents, the violet pinned to her coat, the walks along the Capitol steps, and the small notebook that remained hidden even after her passing. In these recollections, she was alive, not in lists or ceremonies, but in the quiet shaping of minds and the gentle imparting of principle. The metaphor of mist seemed apt for this era, a slow, encompassing veil through which her legacy passed unnoticed by the broader world, yet fully tangible to those attentive enough to observe. Like fog settling over stone and pavement, her story blurred into the margins of official history, but remained persistent in its subtlety. Each account, each reference, was a drop of recognition carried silently, merging into the larger river of historical memory that, while unseen by many, continued to flow steadily toward eventual acknowledgement. The passage of decades brought change to the world. Yet her memory remained anchored in stillness. Schools whispered of her influence. Archives preserved letters and lectures. Historians debated interpretations of her choices, the symbolic violet, the steadfast placement of her medal, the unlocated notebook. Each mention was a quiet affirmation that honor cannot be erased entirely, even when formal recognition is delayed. Her life became a steady rhythm of patience, endurance, and quiet influence, leaving an impact that endured subtly and deliberately, shaping the world in ways both gentle and lasting. Even amid the slow flow of history, her story carried the resonance of lived courage. Those who knew it, whether through hidden lectures or archival glimpses, understood the quiet power of persistence. The 58 years were a testament not to absence, but to the nuanced, enduring presence that exists beyond formal acknowledgement. The medal might have been withdrawn, the official pages left blank, yet the essence of her deeds remained alive, flowing gently through the folds of time, like mist over a still river, subtle yet inescapable. When her name was eventually restored, the world recognized the quiet years of stillness as part of her journey, acknowledging that courage and persistence exist both in action and in memory. Yet even before that moment, her life had been recounted and revered in secret, a testament to influence measured not by ceremony, but by its enduring effect on hearts, minds, and the slow, steady pulse of history itself, out in those 58 years. The world had paused around her absence, yet memory had not wavered. Documents, whispers, lectures, and recollections carried her forward, allowing her life to remain vivid and instructive, even as the official lists told a different story. Time moved like mist over ancient stone, and within that quiet persistence, she lived and inspired, enduring in stillness. Her presence remembered, until long-delayed recognition finally arrived to honor her steadfast life and enduring influence. The year 1977 brought a quiet yet profound correction to history. President Jimmy Carter, in a thoughtful gesture of acknowledgement, restored her Medal of Honor, finally reconciling official recognition with the steadfast reality of her life's work. The announcement traveled slowly at first, filtered through the channels of government and press. But when it reached the halls of memory and archives, it resonated with a deep sense of overdue justice. For decades, her name had lingered in quiet presence, whispered in lectures, and remembered in secret. Now it returned with dignity to the public record, placed formally where all could see and honor it. The medal, once removed from lists and obscured by bureaucratic technicalities, was carefully restored to its rightful place. Those who witnessed the ceremony ascribed it not with grandeur, but with calm reverence, the soft clinking of the ribbon, the polished gleam of the medal catching the light, and the subtle nods of acknowledgement from those gathered. Some historians debated endlessly whether her legacy had simply been ahead of its era, or whether it was truly unmatched, a singular embodiment of courage, persistence, and moral clarity. Yet whatever the debate, the moment itself required no words. The medal's return was a quiet confirmation of history's eventual alignment with truth. In the museum where the medal would rest, staff carefully positioned it beneath warm, steady illumination. Nearby, a letter documenting the restoration was gently placed beside it, framed in the soft amber glow of the display case. The letter, like the medal, became part of the story and artifact of reconciliation between time and memory. Observers often remarked on the serenity of the scene. The medal gleamed faintly under the light. The paper shimmered in subtle reflection, and the space around them seemed suspended, holding a breathless stillness, as if the museum itself recognized the weight of patience and persistence it now contained. Visitors often lingered, drawn not just to the medal, but to the quiet aura surrounding it. The violet she once pinned to her coat seemed present in spirit, linking the object to decades of influence. Soft whispers filled the space as recognition, long delayed, was finally granted. Warm light, thoughtful arrangement, and reflective silence honored more than an award. They celebrated a life of gentle persistence, unwavering principle, and steadfast courage. For years, the story of her medal's absence had been an undercurrent in historical discourse, cited by scholars and students, noted in letters, and whispered in private lectures. But now, at last, the absence had been transformed into presence. Every detail mattered: the meticulous placement of the ribbon, the soft reflection of light off the polished surface, and the quiet dignity of the exhibit room. Even as visitors came and went, the medal held its place, steady and luminous, as though finally at peace, reconciled with the passage of decades and the slow unfolding of history. There was a calm universality to this moment. It was not triumphant in the conventional sense. It did not require applause or fanfare. Instead, it resonated with the rhythm of decades-long patience, the understated acknowledgement of endurance, and the quiet power of principle finally recognized. The medal rested, the letter lay beside it, and together they whispered the story of a life lived in alignment with truth. Waiting for the world to catch up, historians continue to debate the nuances of her influence, the subtle interplay between innovation and circumstance, the choices she made, and the symbolism she carried. Yet in that quiet display, no debate was necessary. The Medal of Honor glimmered softly beneath the light, and the letter beside it shone with a muted brilliance, together narrating a story of justice, perseverance, and finally, acknowledgement. The museum space held a hush that invited reflection, a reminder that some truths, however delayed, are steady enough to endure decades of stillness before recognition finally arrives. In the museum, the light fell soft and even, illuminating the medal without glare, bathing the display case in warmth. The surrounding space was quiet, almost reverent, a pause in the flow of time where visitors could simply stand and breathe, aware of the history held in this small, polished object. The Medal of Honor rested calmly beside the letter, the medal catching a subtle glimmer from the lamp, its presence serene and undisturbed. The air itself seemed hushed, carrying a rhythm of history that, at last, aligned with the life Mary Walker had lived, a life of courage, principle, and quiet persistence. Time moved slowly here, each moment drawn out, like the gentle turn of a page, like the whisper of wind through leaves on a distant day. The medal, steadfast and luminous, seemed to breathe with the patience of decades, while shadows softened around it, blending with the amber light. Visitors felt the stillness, a gentle settling of breath, as if the world itself were exhaling after long expectation. Allowing the calm of truth to linger in the warm glow. Evening arrived in a gentle rhythm, and the museum's lamps cast soft light over the medal, reflecting a life lived fully and rightly. There was no hurry, only history settling calmly into place. The medal rested, the letter remained, and perseverance glimmered quietly, like moonlight dancing on still. Serene waters. The room whispered a lullaby of memory, time, and honor. The subtle hum of the building, the slow drift of light, the invisible presence of past lectures and acts of courage, all combined into a final, soft cadence. And as you read these words, let your mind rest in the same tranquility. Let the light fall gently, the air move slowly, the quiet echo of history soothe your thoughts. Good night, sleep peacefully. The medal rests, the letter shines softly, and the quiet rhythm of courage and truth endures. End of script. Thank you for listening, everyone.